And as I just wrote on Hangouts, I rewatched a video, and from everything I hear you say now, I have the impression you understand fully what I'm saying.
I think I do.
Great, because now we have two different ways of talking about it, about the same thing essentially. And yes, you're using way different terminology than I am, but it's actually a good thing, because
yes.
both clarifies what the problem was in communication, and then we have different ways of talking about it. So it's just a matter of finding a common way of talking about it.
Yes. I'm still trying to understand, and that's on me, not on you, how this differs from how I understood the vocabulary previously. Because, and I'm not like, I think it's distinct, and I'm trying to understand and explain or figure out exactly how it's distinct. Because when I spoke of standalone claim, I wasn't thinking so much, though it's perfectly valid, of, hey, here's this claim in context being considered standalone, but the claim where we kind of forgot where it came from and erased it and blah, blah, blah. And there's another meaning, which is where it's being reworked, yet another meaning. It's what I think it's closer to what Tim calls canonical, where the claim's been reworked, so there's minimal dependency on actually going to the context to understand it.
I would say no dependency, but I see what you mean, because for me, no dependency is what standalone is. Standalone, hence no, it stands on its own.
Yeah, and for me, that's aspirational, because there's always dependencies.
True, but I mean, yeah, we agree there, but that's different. It's different in, as you said, in an interpretation of how the user should interpret it. Is the user expected to go to one specific source to help interpret it, or can it occur in any source? And the discussion is about how it may occur in any source.
Yeah, but this is where the idea of reference and it's how the disagreement started, really. How much background knowledge can we require in a standalone statement, right? Like if I say this statement is only intelligible to people who understand, I don't know, differential topology, right? I'm not pointing to a specific book, but I'm pointing to a body of knowledge.
No,
whereas
but I know what you mean, and I don't think it matters at all, because the point is, if it's not better defined, it's not made more explicit, not more specific as a more specific standalone claim. The point is that it's whatever people agree with. And if people can't form an agreement or disagreement because they don't understand the context, they won't form an agreement or disagreement. If there's multiple contexts where it's not clear which one or the other is meant, it's ambiguous, and that needs to be resolved. But it's true on standalone claims, it is through the discussion that the specificity arises, but any potential specificity is valid. It's not about whether or not people understand it. Some people may understand and they don't need the more specific version.
I see what you're saying. There is a difference between saying this is difficult to understand without prior knowledge, but once you have the prior knowledge, there's not much ambiguity, versus there's different versions and with different prior knowledge. Fair enough.
And I think part of the discussion in a canonical system is to resolve that. And if it's one or the other, probably, I mean, there we can put that far ahead because we don't have it. But I think it will evolve in different discussions that then resolve that through specificity of standalone claims.
Right. Makes perfect sense. I'm still trying to.
I think the big interesting thing that I heard you struggle with still, and that's also what Timothy is suggesting, why it's not different for him adding the fragment with a link that shows there, that just adding a lot of specificity, like adding a definition. It doesn't matter whether you add a definition, the definition is just linking to a source. That is the definition of that claim.
Yeah.
And I think you're also still struggling there, and that's where really understanding what I mean by delineating the definition comes in. If you link to a source, everything that should be looked at in order to infer, or try to infer, because you might not have the knowledge, but try to infer to form a definition, is delineated within the standalone claim. Sorry, I don't know why I started the sentence. If you link to a website, you don't have the delineation. If you have a standalone claim, the intent of a standalone claim is that everything that you should use to interpret the claim is embedded in a standalone fashion. You don't have to go to any other source. Well, that to interpret it, you will rely on other sources, but
yeah, and this is, by the way, where I think I still disagree with you, because how should I put it?
Let's put it this way. What I mean, you can't assume any one particular source that is the authority on how it should be interpreted. That's the big distinction. With the standalone claim,
there I agree. But what I'm saying is, if I'm pointing, and that's a very good example. If I'm pointing to the sentence in the book, right? The book is assumed to be well enough delineated. Now, of course, it's possible that the book is unintelligible without prior knowledge of the field, right? But still taking the differential geometry example, but I'm still speaking about, hey, this statement in this expert book.
Yeah, but see,
the
I think in that
clear.
sense, the examples we gave are bad, because yes, I understand that this statement in that book can perfectly be understood as a standalone claim. In that sense, they were actually very bad examples because they're very ambiguous. Yes, this statement in that book can be a standalone claim. But I would argue this sentence on that website in the majority of cases cannot be a standalone claim, because it's very hard to delineate a website, as I argued before. It's very easy to delineate a book. So in that sense, it's much easier to create a standalone claim about a statement in a book than it is.
But what I'm trying to point out is that this is precisely a difference of degree. I don't think it's a difference of nature. To understand the book on differential geometry, I need to understand all this body of previous mathematical work, which is not specifically pointed to, not delineated, but it's all these external references. Whereas it's true that to understand the meaning of that sentence in that page in that site, I may have to refer to other pages in that site or not. And again, how much prior knowledge? There's no a priori cutoff point, but I'm saying it's true of anything. It's also true of the book.
That is true of anything. The difference is the delineation. Like let's take the example of the book that cites other books.
I'm pointing out that the delineation of the book, though it's true that it's easier to delineate the book, there's also something illusory about saying it's well defined, because
I'm not saying it's well defined. I'm saying that it's what the scope of what should be assumed. I always used to say in the past is well defined. Let's take the book example. You can have a standalone claim that indeed it refers to a sentence in a book.
Yeah.
But you can also have a standalone claim that refers to a sentence in a book, but includes one of the references on how one of the terms in the book should be interpreted. The first standalone claim, you can have a discussion about how that sentence should or shouldn't be interpreted. That's a relevant discussion to have. In the second standalone claim, there is no discussion. It's clearly within the definition, just like attaching a definition, you're just attaching a reference. And again, I don't think these are useful standalone claims to have in the system, by the way, but we're talking on the conceptual level here. That's the difference between these two standalone claims, where more stuff is included in the claim itself as a standalone fashion that then determines the relevance of the discussion about that standalone claim. It's the exact same thing with definitions. You have a standalone claim that's only a piece of text. You have that same standalone claim, the same piece of text, but a definition attached to it for one of the words. The discussion you have about both is entirely different.
I see what you're saying, and I don't think that's the distinction I'm talking about.
Okay.
It's not wrong. It's not irrelevant, but yeah, no, I'm talking about something else up to a point. And I think I'm talking something closer to your original distinction about, am I considering this statement in the book in its abstract sense, right? And that's sure. I mean, this statement, if it were made anywhere, like this means.
Yeah, so you don't link to the book, essentially, only
I could link to the book. I could, yeah, or not.
But you could. But here's the thing, what I call a standalone claim, there's no point for linking to the book.
Exactly.
Because you're talking about it in the abstract sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's the case where you're saying, hey, this statement as used in this conversation and this usage of this statement in this conversation. And that's the, and in a way, this is very much a meta thing because it's about quoting. It's not just the statement, it's the speech act that used the statement.
Well, remember, we got here because we're trying to define interpretation claims, and that's also why you guys ended last. That is why we started, because I was saying an interpretation claim is always a contextual claim. I don't think it's possible to have an abstract, consider an interpretation claim in the abstract. I think would be a very useless standalone claim.
Well. I think what I've been saying is it is useful to, and in a way I agree with you, to consider the family of all abstractions that have been made about, like, take
the relation is relevant. I'm not arguing the relation is
relevant.
The whole point is you want to indeed have many relations of many contextual claims of interpretations to the same standalone claim. That's what you always say. That's super interesting to have, and I agree. We
we agree on that. That's not the point. Good.
The distinction is that
yes,
it's a contextual claim, this interpretation claim, and you cannot treat it the same way as a standalone claim because they are inherently different. One has a specific context linked to it, and the other one doesn't, and that impacts everything: how you model it, how users should interact with it, probably which relationships you can draw among them, etc. And I don't have all the answers there. I simply know they're inherently different, and we need to talk about them differently.
I agree totally with that. But what I was trying to say is, when I say this statement in this book, or this statement in this web page, or this statement in this conversation, right? That's a contextual fragment. There is, you speak about the need for delineation for making it into a optimally standalone claim. What I'm saying is the fragment is usable without the delineation.
I'm confused here. Let's go, because
Let me repeat that.
Because you said contextual fragment. For me, a fragment is always contextual. But I think for you, fragment is a subset of text or something. Or just
no. Here I'm using, I was just emphasizing, and yes, I agree, fragment's always contextual.
Okay, so continue then.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, even without delineation.
Of what?
Of all the required context for precise understanding of what the fragment means in that context. All the required context for interpretation. What I hear you saying is, to do the interpretation properly, you have to delineate how much of the context you're bringing in with the fragment.
No.
And I'm saying there's two versions.
That's what I said.
Okay, but I'm saying, it's what I heard, and I'm saying there's two versions. There's one with and without delineation, and both are useful. And this is why I'm saying we don't need delineation for the fragment.
The one with delineation I would call a standalone claim. So the point is, if you have a fragment well, you have a fragment, given that we seem to agree that's what it is.
Yeah.
And you make a claim about the fragment, it's contextual by its nature, because a fragment contains a locator or whatever, like it contains a place where something was said.
Yeah.
Very specific. So that's why I said all claims about fragments are contextual, because when you link to the fragment, that means you link to the media source, and that media source is not well delineated. It might be, and that's why the examples with the books came in, actually really bad examples. Now the goal of interpretation there is exactly going from that fragment to a standalone claim. That fragment probably entails a claim. That's why you're trying to make a claim about a fragment. For example, an interpretation claim. The author with this fragment in this source is trying to claim, and then you link to a standalone claim. In the abstract sense, what is the author in this context in abstract sense trying to say, so that we can, like you say, have erasure of the context, and we can talk about the standalone claim in many different contexts and have a much broader and Yep.
Okay. I think I can explain better where the difference may lie. And it's a difference of vocabulary, not of.
Yeah, it is. I mean, after watching the end of the meeting, it is at this point trying to figure out the right words to talk about it, which is awesome.
Yes. For me, the fragment with a non-delineated context, because we agree that's what a fragment is, can be used in what I was calling a standalone claim, because, it's an entity, we can speak about it, and there's no, there can be some ambiguity of reference, but there's no dangling reference as in non-indexical. It's using the fragment in a claim doesn't make the claim indexical, because even though the delineation is fuzzy. And that's what I meant by it can be used in a standalone claim, in that it's a non-indexical claim, as opposed to, you're saying it's not standalone in the fullest sense of the term, because without the delineation, it's still fuzzy, it's still ambiguous. Now, and here, I'm not sure. I think a standalone claim can still be ambiguous, and it's not.
We agree standalone claims can be ambiguous.
Yeah.
We also somewhat agree that all claims, standalone or contextual, are indexical.
Exactly. So it's not minimally ambiguous. It's not a minimally ambiguous claim. Now the question is, are we willing to call a claim about a fragment which has ambiguity because there's no delineation in the fragment? Are we still willing to call it standalone because it's ambiguous by virtue of it's ambiguous despite having the ambiguity? Though I agree it's not minimally ambiguous without the delimitation, and any progress towards from the vague standalone claim to a precise standalone claim would involve the delineation process you described.
And erasure of the context, most
likely.
And
erasure of the yeah.
So for me, that's simply what I call a standalone claim, is once the context has been erased. That's literally the definition, I would say, using what we've been talking about. And as long as but yeah, no way. And then the complexities, of course, you can also add context through definitions and through, yes, and that's why the language gets icky, right? Because I understand that you can have standalone claims about very specific contexts. You can have a definition of the election of blah, 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 blah in that country, and you clearly define this is what the claim is about. Yeah, that it makes the context very specific, but in a standalone fashion.
And that's why I'm saying, for me, the inclusion of a context does not make it not standalone by my definition of standalone. And we're arguing trying to find good terminology for both definitions.
It is terminology, but it's interesting because you agree now that the fragment is not delineated.
Oh, I always
the subset.
I used to say, delineation is arbitrary, but what you're saying,
what delineation I'm talking about now.
Yes.
Well, and my point is that all standalone claims in that same fashion are delineated. Or that's what a standalone claim should be. It should, in that sense, and that really hard to explain sense, be delineated.
And I'm saying, for me, that's not a standalone claim, but that's a minimally ambiguous standalone claim. And
you can call it that, but at this point, names don't matter. But that has always been how I use standalone.
Yeah. But and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, yes, I agree. I'm saying there's something which is, and this is the question: how important is erasure? And I think I agree with you that it's very important. But is erasure necessary for something to be part of the canonical debate?
Well, it depends what canonical means, but I mean, we're definitely going to agree, and with Timothy, I'm not that certain, but we need to have discussions about contextual claims. I've never been saying we don't want to discuss contextual claims.
Yeah, that's
I was
what
saying,
I'm saying,
for example, once you understand the distinction, I think it's probably not relevant to add contextual claims as supporting arguments to standalone claims. And we can think of examples, but we can only do that if we agree on the terminology.
Yeah, I still disagree with that as a matter of principle, and because let me give a precise, simple example.
By the way, I'm not 100% convinced by this. It's an intuition.
Good. I'd
love to hear an example.
If I say, some people actually believe the Earth is flat, and then I use a contextual claim. Look, in this passage, this person clearly states that they believe that the world is flat, and
that's what I call evidence. That's what I call evidence. All the examples I can think of are evidence. It is support, and evidence can support claims, but that's why I said you don't really believe or not believe in evidence, although I guess in this case, the contextual claim would be somebody here wrote, and I guess you can say, yes, I agree with that. So I see your point, but it definitely falls more in the evidence realm, but yeah, okay. It's a good example of you could treat it as a supporting argument in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think it is. And that's why this whole notion of you can't use contextual claims.
Well, but I think I already said that if all the examples we can think of constitute evidence, I would just call that evidence. And then you can say, yes, you can add evidence, and evidence is allowed to be contextual, which makes perfect sense because evidence is by its very nature, I would argue, contextual, whereas standalone claims, supporting standalone claims, it's more rhetorical, it's more argumentative. And that's the distinction, I think, between.
Okay, let me think about this, because yeah, I'm not sure that, okay, you're trying to introduce a distinction between kind of logical entailment and empirical entailment.
I think it's implied in that, yeah.
Yes, and empirical entailment could have standalone claim, but logical entailment couldn't. I'm not sure that's true.
The opposite, right? Empirical entailment would have
contextual, but you would not allow
exactly.
contextual in logical entailment.
Yes, yeah, I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
and again, it's an intuition. The whole point of the discussion of the past 3 weeks has simply been to be able to have these discussions, essentially.
Yes, yes. I don't think that's true, because if I'm speaking about, Nietzsche's beliefs about God, is that contextual or acontextual? Nietzsche really believed God existed and was dead,
or Nietzsche. Both. I think that's why it's so difficult to talk about this. It can be both. You can both use it as a standalone one, but also as a contextual one.
What I'm saying is, if you allow that it can be standalone, then obviously I can use contextual claims to buttress it in a logical way, not just as, well, of course, it's also evidence, but I mean, what I'm saying is,
but it's different, right? Because
proof by contradiction is proof by contradiction evidence or logical? Because proof by contradiction is a counterexample, which is presumably
I would call it evidence.
Specific.
I would call it. Well, okay, and contradictions can maybe also be the result of logic, by the way. I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure I believe in. Okay, so what's a non-evidence logical entailment then? I'm not sure they exist. That's what I'm saying.
What do you mean non-evidence logical entailment? I mean, if logic, in the sense of how I know it in informal logic, you have premises you need to assume as true, and from that you make inferences. The premises tend to be abstract, yes.
Well, a lot of premises are not abstract. That's what I'm saying. If you look at most logic textbooks, they have existential individual as premises.
And I recognize it, but it's a different beast, right? And I agree. I think I would call something like that evidence. And I think even in logic textbooks, they differentiate between one and the other. In that sense, I would guess.
Yeah, universal statements, but even universal statements, like, what is abduction, which is as generic as it gets, but making plausible generic statement from specific statements. Deduction is supposed to be the realm of non-evidence based, but the realm of deduction is already restricted. I'm not sure it's a useful subrealm.
Okay, but these are the types of discussions I hope to go to. I don't think we need to do that now. I think that the primary thing now is to try to understand why Timothy still thinks that it's the same model. And well, something struck me as very odd in last meeting, by the way. He said it's a user interface concern. You just show it differently. That might have been my reading. I don't know whether he said it, but he said
okay, okay, let me try to paraphrase him now, because I think I know where he's coming from. What he's saying is that there's at an abstract level, and there I agree with him, there's a abstract superclass namespace, yada, 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 where you can use either contextual or standalone claims as premise, as
I guess that's
support.
what we just discussed, right? So yes, we have some agreements. Contextual claims can be support as well as standalone claims, if you recognize there's a distinction even.
Yeah, I think he's not saying there's no subclass. He's saying that there is a common abstraction, and for him, he doesn't see the need to create another top-level class.
Exactly, but that's where I was getting. If there's no need to have another distinct top-level class, and it's simply a user interface concern, how does the user interface know to display one or the other? How does the user know to interpret this one or the other?
He's not, and that's what I'm trying to say. He's not saying it's just a user interface concern. He acknowledged the need for a user interface concern, and I think he does acknowledge the need for a distinct subclass as opposed to a distinct top level.
He said it's the same model.
He said it's the same model, meaning it's the same top-level class.
And he was implying that you don't need to model it. That's how I understood it, because it's in the claim you make. Like you have two different claims. One is the fragment is racist, and the other one is the fragment in this context should be understood as racist for him. He doesn't need a separate model because it's in the language you use, and when people read it, they
but
can
you don't
need
need a separate how I hear it, and I may be wrong. But how I hear it is you don't need a separate model, and maybe he's kind of refusing our distinction between interpretation of standalone and interpretation of contextual. Maybe he's refusing that. But what he's saying, which I do agree with him, is they're both interpretations and they're both part of the abstract claim. They're both abstract claims.
Yeah, you both want to talk about, I don't think there's disagreement there. That's also what we agreed on earlier. You need to be able to talk about both.
Yes.
But if you don't recognize that they're different and you want to talk about them differently based on different contexts, and that's what he's not saying.
But I'm not sure he's saying that. That's what I'm trying to say. I think he's saying they're both in there's no other top level class, and I'm not sure I agree with him on this. At least I agree with him on this, on the fact that the standalone and contextual claims both have a claim abstract superclass, so you don't need two top-level class. You have two subclasses, but you don't need two top-level class with no abstract superclass. There I agree with him. The question of the inference link, is there an abstract superclass to the inference link, which is inference in general, as opposed to, and of course there's a claim, which is, claim link, support link, which is claim link, which is an abstract superclass of that. But is there an abstract superclass that is both kinds of inference and nothing else? That I think he believes there's none, and I'm not sure I agree with him there. I think I'm closer to you. I think, yes, these are distinct kinds of inferences. I was arguing against that myself, but you did win me over that one, clearly.
Because how you do the inference and how the user should be doing the inference is distinct. It's not the same type of, well, it's the same conceptual type of inference, but what you look at, the delineation is different.
I'm even going as far as to assert that one should never do interpretation on standalone claims. There's refinement on standalone claims.
Yes. If you want it, I see what you're meaning. Yes, and I think that's even the same as I was arguing to you.
Yes,
and meetings ago, that these are different types of interpretation.
Yeah, I was resisting that, but I did totally agree.
It's so interesting. It's so difficult to find terminology for all of these things. you read up a lot of theory. Now that you fully understand the distinction we're both making, we're aligned there. We're still struggling finding words we can agree on, right?
Yep.
Do you have any relevant theory sources we can point to just to let it decide for us? I mean, this must be a distinction that has been spotted before.
Of course. Nothing comes to mind immediately. I will try, except actually the topic mappers have.
Yeah, might be.
The topic mappers speak of occurrences of the topic.
Yeah. So it would be super cool maybe if, I mean, one of the next theory-based meetings, which is, I guess, today actually.
Now, that's what we're doing, yes.
You could introduce the relevant terminology to describe these distinctions from whatever relevant fields. I don't really care.
The topic mappers, the way the topic mappers do it, it's pretty simple, right? Any representation, either by a word or a structure, is a subject proxy. We're speaking about a subject. The subject is kind of the equivalence class, modulo whatever we want to use as an equivalence relation. And when the subject is mentioned in a given superstructure, that's an occurrence. So there's some.
That's what Carl called an appearance, by the way. I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think so. Yeah.
In that sense, it's probably still a good name.
Yeah, occurrence, appearance, both are good. I'm happy, and fragment is probably equivalent to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the notion is there's the appearances of different terms, which are different subject proxies, which are equated by some equivalence relation as being about the same subject.
Yeah, and that's the interpretation and stuff. That's where we got stuck, right? Because I mean, this all started by trying to define the interpretation relation as a claim. You remember there should be interpreted as, should be understood as, can be understood as, which are all valid different types of claims, and probably some or all of them are needed. And
that's interesting, because I noticed that you seem to be using should be interpreted as the primitive notion, and I tend to use could be interpreted as the primitive notion.
I don't know what you mean by primitive notion, but I mean, well, I'm introducing should be understood as what I, of course, I'm aiming for to have a meaningful appearance, occurrence, whatever you want to call it, mapped to a standalone claim, in a sense that you can move the discussion to a standalone claim.
What I mean by primitive notion is that I would tend to define should have in terms of could have, and I think you would tend to define could have in terms of should have.
Could be.
It's that simple.
And unfortunately, well, there is some guidance for this in English.
That's not difficult.
I'd have to read up on this again, but even very basic words like this, actually, in everyday conversation, are interpreted differently. So. Yeah, but I really like, by the way, the formulation you guys came up with after that meeting. I left, I think. Do you remember that Timothy wrote like a list of all different types of claims about fragments? Yes, here. I'll share it with you.
They're linked to the
Marc-Antoine. Have you watched blah blah blah? Here, we've pointed out lots of subtypes of interpreted as claims. When the author said X, the best interpretation is as claim Y. I think that's what I would call should be understood as.
Yeah.
And indeed, the best is a nice way of not using should, because that is the claim I'm making. And then I would argue it's mutually exclusive, because the best implies there's only one, right? So I really like that formulation, and then we can have a discussion.
The author said X. Let me read. When the author said X, one of the things they were saying is Y.
That's the second one. Is more what you how you understood should be understood as. I think one of the things they were saying is Y.
Some people can be, and when the author said X, we should take that as meaning Y.
And I think our disagreement on how we both understood should be understood as was me. I understood the first one, the best interpretation is as claim Y, and you interpret as one of the things they were saying is Y.
Yeah, or even the third, frankly. When the author said X, some people interpret it as Y. Can be interpreted as. I don't think,
if I remember correctly, I don't think, because that one we both agreed on.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I would even define interpretation 1 in terms of interpretation 3, in the sense that, hey, this is what most people understand. Or there's good valid counter arguments to the other interpretations.
But the whole point, of course, of the best interpretation was that it's mutually exclusive, which is why we uncovered that we understood it differently.
Yes.
And then there's a discussion, and I mean, I always intuitively felt like it should
there's only one.
It should, no, I know there's multiple, but the claim that people should express agreement with is the first one being the best interpretation, because that's what gets you to a meaningful alignment on which standalone claim to pick among all of them. Whereas if you
including combinations that way in.
Yes. Because then you have a well delineated standalone claim, but in essence it's a bit similar, because if you as an individual agree with multiple, like one of the things they were saying is Y1, Y2, Y3, if you agree with all of these, you're essentially saying, well, these are the 3 standalone claims we should be discussing. So I'm not fully certain why I prefer the first approach, meaning the best interpretation. Maybe only because that's always how I've been thinking about it. But at that point, we need to discuss UX and what do we hope to get out of this, etc.
And what I'm trying to say is, see, the best interpretation is assuming the author is not there, which I think is a frequent case, or not participating, which I think
it is a frequent case, but I think honestly, if this is ever going to take off, the primary case will be that the author is there and is adding standalone claims themselves.
Yes,
that's what I hope.
I'm not saying the other case is not frequent, but I'm saying
with the hypothesis as a platform case and web annotation, yes, the author typically won't be there starting out. Yes.
Yeah, and the author won't be there starting out. And I mean, we spend a lot of time discussing Nietzsche and Socrates, and they're most definitely not there. No, so we're also talking. There's more dead people than alive, just barely, I think, but still.
That's a very valid point. Yeah.
And that way, that's why I'm more starting from, well, this is how someone has interpreted it. And then we can talk about what is the most plausible, what is the most defensible, what is the most, but I
can explain very quickly why I don't find that a useful thing to model, because this is how someone interpreted it is the same as modeling as a claim can be interpreted as, and someone expressing agreement with that. Essentially, if someone says, I believe in the claim that this can be interpreted as, that is claiming so that's doing already the work you're otherwise trying to express as a claim. Why express something yet again as a different, well, it entails it. So I wouldn't add add, if there's anyone out there that has expressed agreement with the claim can be interpreted as, you can conclude somebody interprets it as.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So there's no need to model it, because it's already through expressing agreement or disagreement, you already have it modeled. It's already in the system. So there's no need for you to add a claim somebody can interpret it as. You simply need to add the claim can interpret as and agree with that, and then you have one individual that thinks it can be interpreted like as such.
I see what you're saying, and obviously that's okay, but I'm saying what you're saying is this is the same as that. This model is the same as that other model, so you don't need to model. Well, the other model is a model too, so it's
no. I mean, it's simply I'm saying why I prefer to always model can first, because once that is modeled, you have the data, if you will, in the system once somebody expresses agreement. But I mean, yeah, you can. It doesn't matter for the sake of understanding each other. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I think that did you say you want to interpret can first, because that's what I've been arguing, and I thought you were arguing against.
No, if you want to support, if in a system you want to formalize, materialize somehow that a claim, some people interpret a claim as, I'm arguing you should probably materialize claim can be interpreted as instead, because if you materialize the claim X can be interpreted as Y, and you express agreement with it, you have what you're trying to model.
Okay, no, yes and no. Okay, now I see what you're saying, and I think I can disagree more meaningfully.
Okay.
I think it's useful to know who agrees and disagrees, because then you know who can defend it in good faith and, you know, make good faith arguments about why this is a valid interpretation. So I would not erase who agrees with that.
I'm not saying you erase it. I actually store right now all agreement and disagreement on Soccer trees. Because exactly, you want to know, because you want to make correlations, like someone that agrees with that and agrees with that.
Okay. But what you're saying is you're doing it with an agreement, personal agreement with the abstraction, rather than storing the personal interpretation. Fair enough.
No, I didn't get the last part. What do you mean, rather than storing?
Okay, but yeah, I still disagree, but more weakly. Okay, I think what you're trying to say, let's say there's two things here. There's claim C can be interpreted as some more precise standalone claim D, right? And then there's I agree with that that this is a plausible interpretation. I'm not saying it's the best, but I'm saying it's plausible. And so you know that it's me making that agreement. But I think there's something more precise, which is saying, I believe that when person X used claim C, he was using it in the meaning D. And that's yet again another claim which I want to be able to model. I agree that this person used it in that meaning. Which is
I would argue one is contextual and the other one isn't. But actually both.
Fair enough.
Okay. All of these are meaningful distinctions to make, and we need to be very clear which is the one we think we need. And if we need all of them, we probably need to give them meaningful names. My point of the last weeks obviously was just to say all of these for me are contextual claims because they refer to fragments. Once you remove the fragment, it becomes a standalone claim, and then we're more like you called it distinction interpretation versus what was it when you do interpretation on standalone claims? You have refinement. Refinement, exactly. I'm
still, though I agree with, I think we're agreeing on most things, I'm still a bit.
I definitely don't have final answers, which ones should be supported first or which ones are most important. That's a discussion we're trying to have. And that's why we got stuck, right?
And certainly, I would not agree to anything that sets aside contextual.
No, and the cool thing is, if we at least understand one another, I mean, there's nothing wrong with modeling it all and then only using a subset in some systems.
Correct.
That's essentially what we're trying to accomplish, I think.
Absolutely correct. And by the way, let me be very clear that I heartfully support modeling a contextual claim as something that, here's the non-contextual part, here's the context, so that a system
versus standalone. And if you come up with better terminology or a related theory where we can steal terminology, then that would be very useful.
I'm still I think that the question of delineation still strikes me as a bit hard to deal with.
It's hard to explain even as well.
Yeah, in the sense that I think people understand, it will be hard to explain precisely the notion that, oh, this is using an external reference, that makes it contextual. And this one is also using an external reference, but it's well delineated, so it's non-contextual.
I would never visualize it. I think it is a UX issue, but even on soccer trees, where I only have standalone claims, right? I mean, you see that users use it in context and they interpret it as contextual, even though it shouldn't be. And it's I think, a big problem with what CDL tries to do from users who are not used to that. They're used to interpreting everything as contextual claims. It's very difficult to teach people to talk about these things in the abstract. Even though I would argue that is probably the most meaningful thing to do, which Kialo is not doing.
And this is why I sometimes make offensive blanket statements. Like sometimes I react to your things you say. And one thing I say, which I'm sure makes you react, is I don't really believe in standalone claims.
Yeah, on a conceptual level, in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, they're impossible to achieve at a certain level. That doesn't mean they're impossible to achieve in general.
So I don't believe they're impossible to achieve. I think it's a very
asymptotic, aspirational
user interaction problem. I definitely think they're possible to achieve, because I mean, I've modeled many different arguments in that sense, and where they fail, once you start using a standalone claim in different contexts, it somewhat resolves itself, if you will.
Interesting. What you're saying is there's a good enough approximation for practical purposes, which
yes, yet still hard to reach, because you see indeed when users start adding standalone claims, they're adding stuff different than what they actually want to add if they were adding a standalone claim. Yeah, so that is a challenge. I think
and we certainly need more names, and I think that's a terminology work for example, well delineated fragment. That's our precise fragment. We were saying that's now a specific project, and we need a name for
yeah, for a lot of things. First, we need to make Timothy understand what we agree on now. Yeah, and ideally,
I think he does understand, but
I'm very skeptical from judging the last meetings.
I think he's saying it doesn't change the top level classes, which I agree with him, or partly agree with him. But I agree on the claim part, not on the interpretation part. The thing that's really important to name is when we speak of standalone claim, we really have a notion of
free of context.
Well, see, that's the thing.
Yeah, I know. What is context? it's never free of context.
It's never free of no, but of minimally ambiguous is what I like to say.
But I find minimally ambiguous equally ambiguous, because
I know
a standalone claim can be ambiguous, right? So
yes. No, but that's precisely it, to distinguish those that are minimally ambiguous from those that are ambiguous. And then we can make the argument that imprecision of reference is part of the ambiguity and needs to be resolved in a minimally ambiguous claim. And you say among the criteria.
No, but there's a distinction. Assuming your definition of ambiguous you introduced several months ago, the one where Paris can be both the person and, I mean, you can have a standalone claim that only contains the text Paris is nice. It's still a standalone claim, but using your terminology and your definition, I wouldn't say it's minimally ambiguous.
That's absolutely correct. That's exactly the distinction I'm trying to introduce. I'm saying.
Yeah, but then how do we name the thing that's still ambiguous, yet it is a standalone claim?
It's a standalone claim. What I'm saying is we need another name for the
okay. Sorry, I thought you were saying that a better name for standalone claim is minimally ambiguous or something.
No. We need a name for the narrower category of standalone claims, which
yeah. I can agree on that.
Yes,
I think that we actually already agreed on that.
Yes.
We haven't really written it down anywhere, but that was one of the fruitful
that's getting urgent because we're stumbling on it a lot.
There's a lot of things we're stumbling on, but honestly, the difference between contextual and standalone, which is also why I'm happy today after the last two meetings, that impression, oh my God, we stepped back like 1.5 years, 2 years.
Yeah.
But because it wasn't clear all of a sudden, like what I originally intended with standalone, but I think you get it now. And because the whole reason for me for introducing standalone was because it's different than contextual.
And I was introducing standalone more as a response to indexicality, and so we still need different names for those two notions.
Yes, we do, because both can be indexical, and that's part of where the ambiguity in these discussions lie. Because Timothy speaks of, oh yeah, but both are indexical and it's the same, but that's not really it. Yeah. It would be
Yeah.
so cool to find better terminology for this.
Yeah, and I need to revisit my little category diagram and see if I can make those categories more precise in that diagram, because I think it may help. I was hoping to do that before this morning, but sleep.
Maybe let's call it an early meeting.
Yes,
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Excellent. Have a very nice weekend.
You too.
Speak to you next time.
Yep, indeed.